enable collaboration, resilience, and innovation. Marilyn has a quite unique CV. So she has been working for multiple big organizations of all sizes, and she knows how to bring the agility of small startups to big corporations. She previously held the position of Chief Marketing Officer of Emaar, the biggest real estate company in Dubai, and she also headed the Dubai Opera. Besides that, Marilyn holds an MBA from INSEAD, and she has also spent 10 years in the startup world, building and running digital native companies. Very warm welcome to you, Marilyn. Then we have our dear Lisbeth Schiavo. Lisbeth is currently the Director People of Culture of Securitas. Securitas is a leading international company in security services. Lisbeth is based in Dubai. She looks back to living more than 14 years already in Dubai. She loves Dubai, and she has also held, before joining Securitas, leading roles in HR, business development, and key account management. Also to you, Lisbeth, welcome and good luck for the webinar today.
Thanks, Eva. Thanks for that amazing introduction. I'm really happy to be here with everybody. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And I'm going to, Lisbeth, give me a thumbs up. This is working. You can see it. Amazing. All right. So as you all know, we're here today to talk about organizational resilience and leadership in a prolonged crisis. Eva gave a very beautiful introduction of what I do. I'm really grateful for that intro. And the truth is, as Eva mentioned, I started as an architect. I spent 10 years in the digital world. I got an executive MBA because I didn't know what EBITDA meant, and I didn't want to look stupid in important meetings. I was the CMO of Emaar for a year. I was the head of the opera for 6 months until the pandemic. And when the pandemic hit, I was let go. Obviously, being the CEO of the opera meant I was the most expensive resource, and there was no need for me to be there. And within a few weeks, 3 or 4 weeks, I had already registered Cosmic Centaurs as a company here in Dubai, and started to think about how we could contribute to the world, and how we could help executives and teams reconfigure the way that they worked. And so in that sense, the word resilience has a personal meaning to me, because I've had to reinvent myself often, but also because I'm Lebanese. And many of you might have seen Lebanon in the news, sometimes for good reasons, but this year for all the wrong reasons. As you know, in August of this year, we had the third biggest explosion in a city in the 20th century, in recorded history, actually. And it led to the destruction of our city. Not to mention the destruction of many lives. And in that sense, the Lebanese have a strange relationship to this word, because we have had to be resilient more times in a single lifetime than any of us had ever wished for. And so when someone tells me to be resilient, like many other Lebanese, I get a little bit angry. But I also recognize the value of being able to rebuild and move forward. On August 5th and 6th, after this explosion, there was a lot of coverage of how, people in Lebanon essentially dusted the glass off of their clothes, out of their shoes, got up and started cleaning the streets. And while I think that no one should ever have to go through that, I think it also demonstrates an ability that many of us can learn something from. It's also why I created Cosmic Centaurs, because I wanted to help leaders and executives figure out how could they bring resilience into their organizations. And so that's what we're here to discuss today. Now, there's a lot of different levels of resilience. There's the individual resilience that the Lebanese have to demonstrate, but we're here today to talk about team and organizational resilience. And while resilience requires a lot of different capabilities, of course, the ability to have compassion, to communicate well, to both have the ability to learn and unlearn, I think a lot of our conversation today will focus on the 3 elements at the bottom. How can you bring in optimism at a time that seems so dark? How can you bring in and welcome innovation while managing uncertainty and leading through the crisis? And I'm joined here today by Lisbeth, who had a really beautiful firsthand experience herself within Securitas, but also a lot of other examples to share with us, and that are going to bring stories to all of the frameworks, hopefully, that we explore together. And I think that's a really valuable contribution. So I can't wait, Lisbeth. Now, we titled this webinar, how to lead in a prolonged crisis. And while we've had many crises before as the human race, even as individuals, there are some things about this crisis that are different, worth mentioning, worth noting. And you'll see later on that one of the main elements of being resilient is facing the hard truth. And so I thought we could start by facing the hard truth. The hard truth is that this crisis is almost 3 times deeper, but also occurred 6 times faster than the previous one. The hard truth is that for the first time, perhaps, it's a crisis that has occurred at a completely global level, whereas previous crises may have had epicenters and other countries or regions that had been left untouched. This one took us all by storm, and it did so at a moment where labor's share of GDP was at an all-time low compared to the last 50 years. And so it did so at a moment where neither were governments prepared for this kind of crisis, nor were individuals prepared for this kind of crisis. And I remember, Elizabeth, as we were chatting about this topic, you said that this, really noted for you that this was a reflection of how we live, right?
Yeah. I mean, now everything is globalized. The world has become so small in all senses, right? And really, we can talk with people the other side of the world in real time right now. And this pandemic really hit us all in real time, right? That same, very, very same moment all together. So really, it looked like this pandemic really reflected how nowadays we all live. And this new globalized world. And thinking about what you just said, and I was thinking that until last year, or not last year, 2 years ago, everyone was talking about this VUCA world, right? Volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. Imagine those times we will talk about VUCA. What are these times then considered, right? So really, we wouldn't have imagined this a couple of years ago. I mean, maybe 15 months ago already. Yeah.
Absolutely. In fact, 50 years ago, we haven't had this kind of level of unemployment since the Great Depression. And similarly, by the time this hit, the percentage of saving rate had also been at an all-time low since the 60s. And so again, we're being hit at a moment where we're not prepared to deal with the consequences. But while it's important to face the hard truth, I think the second part of our conversation will be about being optimistic as well and looking at the silver lining, because there always is one.
Yeah, exactly. I think that for the very first time, we weren't spectators. For the very first time, this wasn't something that was happening on TV or happening to somebody else. This, for the very first time, actually happened to everyone. So this VUCA concept became a very useless concept of all alone, right? I would rather say. And this quality of resilience that earlier we were looking in our leaders when we were recruiting leaders for our organizations has actually to be cascaded to the other levels of the organization. It was not just for the leaders, not just the leaders have to be resilient, but really everyone at this point of time, all in a sudden, have had to become resilient. Really, we have been really put down. The proof was very big for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. But there is a silver lining, right? When I started my company in April and people were like, really? In the middle of a pandemic, what are you doing? I really found comfort in this statistic, right? I found it as I was researching something that 50% of Fortune 500 companies were started in a bear market or in a recession. And in fact, we all know that crises are great opportunities for innovation. And while we're not here talking about the loss of life or the consequences on people, and of course, there's been a lot of negative impact of this pandemic, we're here to also talk about how we can be optimistic and move forward. Yesterday, I attended a webinar where I was able to gather this data. So this is a McKinsey research that was conducted very recently, where they talked to a few hundred executives. And here's the positive data. 50% of those who responded to that survey didn't see any revenue decline in the past 6 months compared to the previous year. And 23% were actually even able to grow their revenue. And so what we're here to talk about today is, what do you need to do to be one of the companies that answers positively to one of these surveys moving forward? And that's why we're here to talk about resilience. I think the first thing, I'm a bit of a word geek, and I always like to start with definitions. And I think, Lisbeth, you and I share that. One thing that's very interesting about the definition of resilience is that if you look at sort of that first one, right, the one related to materials and substance, what it says is that resilience is the ability of that substance to return back to its shape, right? Something happens to it, a power is exerted to it, and it returns back to exactly what it looked like. But when we look at organizational resilience, we're talking about the ability of businesses to reinvent themselves and to develop new models and strategies as their circumstances changed. And you brought in, I mean, I was so ecstatic when I read that, because you brought in a beautiful explanation for why there's such a big difference between the definitions of the same word in different contexts.
Yeah, you know, resilience is such a powerful word, you know, and it's such an active word. It's really, in its essence, the origin of the word is from salire in Latin, risalire, and it means leap. So you have a leap, you know, and you rebound, because re means do it again, do it. Yeah, and then from salire also you have also the other word risultare, that means emerge, turn out to be. So this word resilience really has such a powerful meaning, because to us, you know, with Latin origin languages, means that you got to do something about that, right? This is resilience for countries where Latin is the origin. And I think that this is perfectly translated well into English, also in other languages. So a really active verb. So we will not be there waiting passively for what happens. We got to do something about that. So it's really an incredible word.
Yeah, and I was really inspired when I learned that from you. And so as we're doing research about resilience, I mean, resilience is a word that obviously often returns during crises. So there was a lot of academic work published around resilience, for example, around the year 2000 or around the year 2009. There is one particular piece of work from Diane Kotu that I've always found to be a really beautiful way of looking at how you can develop resilience. And I think that this applies to individuals as well as organizations, which is why that's the one that we're sharing here today. So as I mentioned earlier, the first step in developing resilience is facing down reality. It's our ability to look at how the world is around us and to accept how it is. A beautiful example of that is often referenced in the literature is this man, so General Stockdale. He was actually a prisoner of the Viet Cong, and he was their prisoner for 8 years. And when he came out and you know, people asked him, how did you manage to remain so optimistic? He said actually that he believed that the other prisoners who were there with them actually didn't make it because of optimism. And here's what he explained. He said that the people who were there with him kept hoping that they would, you know, be liberated soon, right? They kept hoping that, you know, by Christmas, their governments would find an agreement, or that by Easter they would be out, or the 4th of July, and they kept being optimistic about when they would leave. It ended up being a full 8 years before they were released. And so he says that while you should never give up and never, you know, waver away from the fact that you will prevail in the end, you must not, you know, forget to accept reality as it is. And we've all went through it, you know, in the early days of the pandemic. I remember everyone saying, you know, back in March of last year, oh, this will be over by September, or by January 2021, we'll have a vaccine, it'll be fine. And I think now a lot of people have come to the point where they can face reality and say, well, we actually really don't know. I mean, we can start to see some optimistic signs, vaccines rolling out. In my country yesterday, I saw a number back in Lebanon where at the current rate of vaccination, it would take until 2031 to vaccinate everybody. So it's just not just about having the vaccine, but so many other variables. Lisbeth, how did you guys approach facing down reality?
Yeah, of course, as you said, it's a mindset. It's definitely a mindset, and no one will give you a solution, right? Because the governments don't know. No one really knows. Even when we will all be vaccinated, still this virus will be around. Right. So really, so I feel that I mean, in our organization, but I feel that also the organizations who want to emerge from this crisis will definitely have to put aside all these worries and stay focused. Stay focused on their purpose. Stay focused on giving themselves, I mean, on having, the idea of what to do next, right? And see this crisis actually as an opportunity rather than, challenges or a crisis as a crisis, right? A crisis as an opportunity. Actually, Winston Churchill said, never let a good crisis get wasted, right? And you also mentioned earlier so many examples of companies successful companies that actually started during the crisis, because actually the crisis, we should take advantage of it and start from there to think how we can do things differently and more efficiently and better. Yeah. So it's definitely a state of mind.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think once you've kind of admitted that whatever context you're in is the way that it is, once you face down reality, and you just quickly mentioned that, the next thing is to reconnect with your purpose. And again, here a beautiful example, even though a sad one, of Viktor Frankl, who was in the concentration camps. And one day, the story goes in Diane Kotu's article, which is linked and you guys can read up later, that he was making a decision about whether he should trade in his last cigarette for a soup bowl. And he got very frustrated that this was what his life had come to, that this was the kind of decisions that he was made to make. And he decided that he wanted to find a purpose. Of course, he had no way of knowing whether he would escape the concentration camp or not. But he simply couldn't stay in that situation without finding purpose. And he ended up actually being able to leave the camp and writing and creating the therapy of meaning. And so what he said to himself that day is, I don't know if I'll come out, but what I do know is that I want to be able, when I do come out, to tell people about the psychology of the concentration camps. And he started making observations and taking notes. He gave himself a purpose for why all this suffering was happening to him. And that's an incredible lesson, to leaders and organizations. You mentioned it, and I'd love to talk about, Securitas is making the world a safer place.
Yeah.
It's so important to go back to why you exist, because that's the only thing that'll give you the courage to kind of push forward, accept the world as it is, but also keep moving, keep going forward.
Yeah, exactly. 100%. As a matter of fact, we feel ourselves as a winner organization, and what keep us all together is certainly our purpose. We actually our purpose is not a very old one. It's only we had our purpose only in 2018, 2019. So a very recent one. We were having earlier a vision, a mission, and of course strategy. Yeah, but the vision and mission was the ones, and our values were the ones guiding us. But since a couple of years now, we have a very strong purpose. We help make your world a safer place. And that wasn't, it was so exact to have that purpose exactly during this pandemic, because we felt we were all united, everyone towards one direction in such a passionate way, right? So it's not that we feel like a winning team because many reasons, but because really we can still deliver our purpose. We haven't lost focus on what we want to do. So that's great.
Yeah, and I think that what this purpose led you to is this aspect of ritualizing ingenuity, which is kind of the third step in this process. If you accept reality as it is and you reconnect with why you exist, then the next step is to take action around that why, right? And so the third step for organizations, when we say ritualize ingenuity, it means create the space for the individuals in your organizations to come up with new strategies, new way of serving your consumer, new ways of contributing to the community. And both Levi Strauss and Carl Weick talk about this. It's this idea of becoming what Levi-Strauss calls a bricoleur, which means a tinkerer. Yes, we were used to strategic planning and everything, you know, making decisions and, you know, cascading them down and so on. But crises call for organizations to come to a place where they allow the individuals within them to follow their learning, to understand how the world is changing, and to be able to experiment with how they're going to serve them. I know, Lisbeth, that in your organization, that was part of the process too, was kind of rediscovering how you were going to continue to live out that purpose and designing new ways of supporting.
Yeah, because no matter what, the show must go on, especially when you are in a business like security and when you want to make the world a safer place, right? So you need to be really creative on how will you still carry on what you were doing earlier, right? So we were already having some things we were working on earlier in the backstage, and then we suddenly accelerated the preparation of this, and we actually proposed them to our clients, and where initially we had like, not sure if this works, doesn't work, if this will work, actually we had the full buy-in of our clients. So for instance, I can give you this example. When schools were closed, malls were closed, we still, and people weren't were not allowed to go to premises. We were still able to monitor the sites throughout remote services, for instance. This was just a simple example that actually was so helpful for our clients, and our clients were so thankful that we accelerated a few things to be able to help them and continue our services in the end. And ultimately, the business didn't suffer that much.
Yeah, absolutely. And what we see from the companies that have been able to sort of, let's say, thrive in the last year or so is truly that they've been able to shorten the decision-making cycles, create, you know, independent teams that are able to react quickly, make decisions, move forward, truly support their customers and their communities. But they've also been able to fund and create resources for these new ideas to be more than simply wishful thinking, right? To truly be able to be implemented at scale and be used by the consumers and communities in which these companies operate. And that's really been kind of a very strong aspect of the companies that have emerged, having either maintained or at least been successful in their growth over the last year. And so if organizations work in that space, and maybe later, especially if anybody in the audience has questions, I'm happy to share, let's say, practical examples of how some organizations have, you know, developed this ritualizing the ingenuity aspect within sort of their governance and their financial structure. We can talk about that perhaps later. But I think it's also important to talk about leadership. So bringing about change is, of course, about finance and governance and funding, but it's also about how one leads. And here I really always like to refer to this book by Andrew Grove. Anyone who's worked with me or been on my team at some point in their career, I've recommended this book to them because it really helped me as an individual to go from being an individual contributor to really understanding how I could help when I was leading others. And so this precedes a little bit the VUCA term, but it's the same thing, right? The complexity, the uncertainty, the ambiguity. And what he says is that when complexity, uncertainty, and ambiguity are low, you know, when we have a little bit of confidence about how the world around us is evolving, then we can lead a team's performance through expectation setting. You know, we can define roles, we can clarify objectives, give people KPIs, cascade the KPIs, check in, and manage an organization's progress through continuous kind of reviewing of its performance. But what he says is that when these things are high, when complexity, uncertainty, and ambiguity are high, then as leaders, now is the time not to manage through, you know, setting goals. I mean, I can't even imagine, you know, I don't know, 6 months ago, how someone would have said, what is your sales target for next year, right? I can't, even if I had to, I would have probably just picked a random number. I can't even imagine how a leader would be able to set a target like that. And so here's where it's more important, while of course targets are still important to keep in mind and to, you know, walk towards, it's perhaps more important to exemplify the cultural values of the organization and to let people then iterate and come up with new ideas and innovate around those values, rather than simply try to continue doing what we were doing before and to continue setting sort of very specific targets to be reached. And I think that as a leader, that means doing a few things, right? So the first thing is collecting relevant information. You know, I always like to say in these webinars that you guys are already doing that, right? You're sitting here with us, learning things, listening to data from around the world, staying in touch with the news, understanding what's going on, trying to get data from your market. And then your role as a leader is then to educate the people around you. It's not to retain that information, because the closer you are to the ground, the more able you will be to take this information, turn it into something interesting. The second step is, as a leader, it's still your job to make the hard decisions. I like to say that's what you get paid to do, right? That's why you get the title and the salary. It's because you're the person who can take on these hard decisions and build confidence into these hard decisions. But once you've made the hard decision, especially again in times of crises when the world around us is changing really fast, it's not about you implementing these changes. It's about delegating and allowing people to have flexibility and freedom in the way that they integrate, the strategies moving forward. And lastly, it's about maintaining the light on what is important by nudging people, influencing them, constantly asking them about the progress that they've made, rather than giving up at the sign of, the next wave of the pandemic, or the vaccine not being distributed as fast as we had hoped, or the airport getting shut down and now how are we going to get, our goods into the country? But it's really over to leaders to kind of model that behavior of maintaining that purpose at the heart of what they do, making hard decisions, and continuously trying to progress towards them. And so how have leaders done that over the last years? So in 2020, we saw a lot of companies switch to new work models and really try to learn and adapt very quickly. I'm sure, Elizabeth, as the person responsible for human resources, you have a lot to tell us about that. We saw organizations build their online capabilities, reconfigure their supply chain, but also put back at the heart of how they were thinking their role in corporate citizenship and in diversity and inclusion. I wonder if you'd like to comment on that.
Yeah, definitely. It's there has been a bigger focus, of course, an acceleration in the utilization of technology and getting the best out of it possibly. And then this wonderful way we have now of working all together, 4 hands on one document, or maybe 6 or 16 in one occasion. It happened to me in several parts of the world. It was incredible, the collaboration, the new way of collaborating that we learned during these times. But then the focus of the companies on the individuals and on the mental well-being and everything that goes around the individual, mentally, physically, etc. In fact, very important decisions have been taken also related to inclusion, on how we can have people more included in the decision-making process. For example, at Securitas, we are a flat organization, and this has been particularly successful for us because we don't have many hierarchical layers. So the decisions in the end have been taken very much in collaboration. So the focus on an individual and on what everyone really thinks, believes, and really everyone has brought something to the table to take decisions. Yes, definitely. And then, yes, we felt like we became more human during these times, because definitely when managers, heads of departments were calling me and saying, what do you think? How do you think my team is? I said, you should call your team and ask them how they are, because earlier we were just working all together in the office, just knocking the door, opening, hi, how are you, having a coffee during the break time. Now this was no longer there. So what we did at Securitas was actually to dedicate time meet, to say hello, to have a coffee. We had coffee mornings, so we had quiz nights, we had different kind of activities that brought us all together. And I feel that we became generally more interested in other people's life. We were asking about children and online learning, etc., etc. So that was quite a nice experience. And also about the environment, we became more careful also about the environment. We started a recent initiative about, we are about to start an initiative for the recycling of plastic, and we just bring initiative to the table just to feel that we are doing something together. Yeah.
Absolutely. That sense of solidarity is a big one that comes out of the companies that manage this crisis quite well. And I think what's also important is how we look at the future, right? There is in acute crisis, we tend to go to kind of our saving mode. It's like when your computer's starting to lose its battery, it starts to kind of shut down some processes and try to cost cut on the energy. And so when a crisis is limited in time and short, and a lot of companies did unfortunately have to, resort to cost cutting and trying to find efficiency and productivity. But I think that the companies that will thrive moving forward, and certainly those that have over the last year, were the companies that were able to remain focused on that business model innovation. You said earlier, Churchill says, don't waste a good crisis. And definitely we know that crises create new markets, they disrupt old ones, they create new problems that people need to respond to. And so we have the data now to show that the companies that did focus on business model innovation, that set high aspirations, that continued to push for growth and didn't just settle for the crisis, that reallocated their resources to the good ideas, to the innovative strategies, and did that by either partnering up with other companies or revamping their technology, are the companies that win. The companies that simply focus on profitability and productivity, on cost-cutting measures, on productivity at all costs, really will not be the ones to thrive. And if we had to give advice, to leaders about how to approach that, that certainly would be it. Continue to dream, to be close to your core. And I think, to kind of come to a conclusion, and then we can go to Q&A. I can see a couple of questions popping up already. Hopefully that'll encourage a few more. To kind of go back to that framework, and what does this then all mean, if we had to give you our best advice. I think in terms of facing down reality, very practically, organizations need to go from strategic planning and forecasts, which is, we plan a year or 5 ahead of time and we work towards these goals, to dynamic scenario planning. Earlier today, I was part of another conversation where I was saying the first thing that our statistics professor said to us at INSEAD, when I was at the MBA, is he explained to us what levels of confidence means, right? And he said, look, if you ask someone to predict what their budget is going to be and they give you an exact number, you should fire that person. You should ask them for a range, because their ability to hit that exact number with a high level of confidence is close to zero. And I always wondered, why do organizations then continue to manage this way, right? Why don't they allow me to provide them with a range, right? Say, if all goes well, if all goes above expectations, we'll be here. And if it goes a little bit below expectations, we'll be there. And here is our range. And the truth is, it could be more a problem of trust than of scenario planning. And I think that that's where that search for meaning plays such an important role. If I trust that everyone is there because they believe in the purpose of the organization and how we create value, including economical value in the world, then I don't have to worry that if they give me the range, they will only work towards the bottom half, right? I can trust that they will push and be as kind of jealous about how this company performs as anybody else. And so leaders leading from a place of culture and not control, setting big dreams, I think is the best guarantee for people to be able to achieve the goals that we set, while knowing that the world is changing so fast that strategic planning just won't work. And on the ritualizing ingenuity side, then it comes to creating, not just saying, oh, we encourage new ideas, but actually investing and putting in resources and money into a portfolio of experiments that have the ability potentially to disrupt our previous business model, and certainly to allow us to go into this new world with new tools and new ways of serving our consumers. And if so, that's for me are kind of the three things that I would love people to go away with and to think about how they're contributing that inside their own organizations. And that's it for us, but I can see a few questions both in the chat and the Q&A, and I'll maybe hand it back over to Eva to moderate this for us.
Thank you very much, Marilyn and Lisbeth, for this very active exchange and conversation. Really learned a lot. So let us start with the first question by Peter, who would like to hear more examples from companies who have managed resilience and how did they do it. So there were a couple of examples already provided by Lisbeth, how Securitas is doing it. So maybe you can share more insights, Marilyn, yourself working with so many different companies, please.
Yeah, maybe I can say that I was also after the same answer of Peter. So I think that we are in that kind of situation that, you know, when you learn how to swim, when they throw you in the ocean and you need to learn how to swim, more or less that was the situation, I believe. Of course, you know, it all starts with very good preparation and good foundations. Companies that actually practiced over the years or maybe the decades on strategizing, re-strategizing, planning, replanning, you know, I feel that they arrived to this historical times more prepared. We are in the business of risk management, and we are in the business of providing a peace of mind, right? So this is what we do every day for us in different areas, right? But as a management team, we are all together in performing and in overcoming crises, small or big, we are facing in our vertical. So I feel that when this crisis arrived, we were somehow prepared. I mean, not really prepared because we knew about this. Of course, nobody knew, but we had already had some preparation in the earlier stages. I also had a look at literature for other companies. I couldn't find much, but maybe Marilyn can tell us.
Sure, I can contribute a few. I mean, I think that if I had to kind of, first I'd say that we're still in the crisis. It's, you know, as someone who loves academic research, it's difficult to kind of just say this company did really well. I think if we looked at the region, one company that at least as an outsider and how they communicated about it, that I think did an interesting job in showing resilience was MAF. You know, they repurposed all of their staff that was working on the industries like hospitality or entertainment that were very hardly hit into serving on the sides that were actually thriving, you know, like the supermarket sides. They also innovated on some more lighthearted things, you know, like their drive-through cinema. But if I wanted to give examples that maybe I can defend in 5 years, because you never know how things go, we're still too much in the eye of the storm. An example that I really love, and I think, you know, yes, today we are in a global crisis. There's a lot of the fundamentals maybe that seem different, but humanity has been through crises before, and companies have been through many crises before, maybe not collective and global like this one, but an example that I really love because it's always, you know, when I say it to people, they're like, really? You know, Fujifilm, right? So they used to produce film for cameras. We all know what happened to the film industry, right? It went down the drain. Kodak, Polaroid, everybody's gone bankrupt. And the example, I use this example a lot in my classes. Do you know that Fujifilm still exists? And also, do you think you know what they do today? They're
coming back to the paper pictures, right? Where you can shoot your picture and then you can give it away. Like in the good old days, and even my daughters, they do have such cameras and they love them.
That's true. They still do the Polaroid piece, but more interestingly, the way that Fujifilm survived is that they are now a cosmetics company. You can Google it. And the reason for that is they had a CEO who came in, and it was a crisis, right? It was a crisis where essentially their market was disappearing because it was being replaced by digital cameras. So it's not like it's a crisis for them in their context. And so the CEO came in and he's like, well, we're going to have to save the ship. And what does a film company have a lot of? really great chemical engineers. And so he said, well, what we've always been good at is allowing people to have beautiful memories and to look beautiful in the pictures. So while we might no longer be the company that takes the pictures, we can be the company that helps people be beautiful in those pictures and feel good about themselves. And they're a cosmetics company, right? I think there are, beyond the sort of the big heroics, I think there's also tangible things that you can do to be a resilient organization. I'll give maybe 3 quick examples. One is you can say that at every level of the organization, 5% of everybody's budget, not the CEO, but anyone who's a budget owner, has to go to innovation. 5%. You have to show me at the end of the year what you spent your money on. That's an idea. Another idea that I love is you have to review all the proposals that were killed. So you go back into every level of the organization and you look at what ideas were coming from the ground that your organization killed because they were too afraid to adapt to change, right? And a third one that I think is also a beautiful case study is Whirlpool. Again, they were going through a crisis of commoditization, right? So appliances costs were going down. The Best Buys of this world were squeezing them for money. And so essentially they were going to start seeing their margins go away. And rather than try to cost cut, they built an innovation program in 1999 that engaged 10,000 of their 65,000 employees, that generated 7,000 ideas, and they practically invested in 300 of them. And that led to things like the Gladiator line, which is a line of appliances that are used in garage for men. So a completely new customer demographic, a completely new set of products, where they weren't getting killed on their range, on their margins, because they were the only ones to have it. So I think there's a lot, even though I wouldn't look at the pandemic just yet to find case studies, I think there's hundreds of case studies that come from other kinds of crises that we can rely on.
Thank you very much. Here's another question for Lisbeth from George. So he wants to know, how does Securitas, who's a heavy labor company, deal with the future? So how can you make sure as a management to motivate your people going forward?
Oh, I love this question. Thank you so much, Giorgio. I owe you. Yes, thank you very much for this question. So this is not a challenge of today. This has always been a challenge because an organization, as you mentioned, a security company, the turnover is normally high. So it's key to be able to retain the talents and keep them engaged. Well, since 2016, so it's quite a number of years, we've been working and we drastically improved our retention of the employees through a series of activities of requalification of talents. So Securitas, we don't provide men guards, right? We provide a security service. So the service comes out from different modules that we put together, and the people element is only one of them. So for us, it's important. So since 2016, when I joined the organization together with the new country president, we made sure that we were actually looking at our workforce and what and where we were heading to. That was a more digitalized approach also to security, and all the innovative things that are coming from our headquarters in Sweden. And so how can we utilize them with our security offices, and how can we sell them on the market here? So the only key was to continuously requalify our staff and make sure that they know how to use all the tools we give them. Our officers are able to collect data and analyze data. I mean, of course, you know, they will not produce graphs or anything, but they will be able to identify things around, thanks to, of course, the technology that we provide them with. So definitely, having the security officers following, I mean, we're all together in this journey, the security officers as well. So this is how we engage them. And this has been proven because our retention has gone up tremendously. We have very high retention rate, and I'm very proud of this. And then this also in high retention rate also in the client space, of course. Yeah.
Sounds great. And Yeah, and you earlier mentioned that you're also during the pandemic, you organized quiz nights and you had this virtual coffee in order to really give the people the sense we are one team, although we are spread apart and we are no longer going to the office on a regular basis, or if at all, but still there are ways how we can get together as a team and
we
continue.
make sure, because we know everyone. Of course, Securitas in the UAE is not very big. We have less than 1,000 employees, but we make sure we know everyone and we talk to everyone, and we were all together in this. It was such a hard time, we had people they just couldn't go home because there were no flights to go home, there were no holidays, nothing, right? And when the isolation came, it was also very difficult, but we made sure that we were all together. But also when it comes to the moving forward, the future, what we provide is a service. So our security officers make sure we deliver the service, and we equip them with all they need to do that.
Great, thank you. So then there's a question from Gratiana. She wants to know, instead of pushing it top down, how can a company cultivate this resilient mindset in their company, in their organization?
Yeah, I mean, perhaps I think we kind of brushed on this earlier. I'll give a first approach. I think that there's always this question of like, these ideas sound great and I can do them in my team, but how do you expect me to do them with 8,000 people, right? And I think that there's a few things that have to be kind of a prerequisite. First of all, the CEO buy-in is not debatable, right? Like, it has to be that the leadership at the top are completely committed to taking that forward. Without that, any kind of movement towards change isn't possible. But then after that, I think it's really about, what is a company in the end? It's a set of financial guidelines, or abilities. It's a governance process, and it's a way to operationalize change, right? So if we kind of boil it down to fundamentals. And so you need to go and revisit each of these. On the finance side, I gave an example earlier, whether it's allowing for budgets to become more scenario planning than targets to be hit, whether it's allowing for 5% of your budget to become an innovation budget at every level of the organization. I think that once you remove the shackles, people really just want to build something they're proud of. Shackles are important in companies because they are what allows us to have some form of control, because otherwise, if a company goes bankrupt, there's nothing worse that can happen to both its employees and its ecosystem. So while governance is important, removing those aspects of the financial, political, or operational governance that are holding people down, the length of the decision-making processes, the scope of influence of everybody. I think you will find that individuals, when they see that this is real and they believe it, they don't think it's another one of those change programs that are never going to do anything. When they start to see tangible changes in how the company makes decisions and spends its dollars, they will find ways to bring in innovation and ingenuity into the process.
Great, thank you. So we have two more questions. I think then we have to wrap it up, unfortunately. So there's Rajat, who talks about the fact that publicly listed companies, they have to always the quarterly targets that have to be published and the results, and they focus away from more sustainable actions, right? So he is asking, what are the alternatives that can be executed and have a similar impact on the bottom line, instead of always looking at cost cutting and numbers?
I mean, first of all, I've never been the CEO or an executive in a publicly listed companies. So maybe the examples I'm going to give, somebody who is going to be like, that's cute, it doesn't work, but let me try anyways. I think that, of course, there are financial fundamentals that go into play into publicly listed companies. You have to have good financials because there's thousands of analysts looking at what you're doing. But if we're looking beyond that, I think the story of managing your share price is also a story of great storytelling. I mean, we love to take this Amazon example of a company that had been losing money year after year after year after year after year, but with the share price going up. And that's because of great vision, the belief in innovation, and the ability to tell that story in a way that people believe that. And so I think there's equal parts looking at the bottom line, but also explaining what you're going to do with the potential of the organization. And there's another kind of stock price story that is less funny. But I don't know, Kodak obviously is a company that went bankrupt a few times. We talked about that earlier. I think in its third lifetime, there was a day where the CEO announced that they were going to launch a blockchain-based tool for photography, and the share price went up 3 times. Right. So while the market is an important way of looking at the value of our organization, it can sometimes also be very wrong about it. And so I just think that if you, again, this is me kind of saying, if I was the CEO of a publicly traded company, here's what I would think. I think it's great. It's very important to have a healthy company with great governance. It's equally important to have a story about how you're going to change the world, quote unquote, or what you're going to do with the value you're creating. And I think the market responds to both. And so that story of we are allowing our people to innovate. I mean, I don't know if you read the letter that Jeff Bezos wrote to his company on his last day as CEO, but essentially he said, I believe in your ability to dream. And if you dream of something for which we need to develop new capabilities, I believe Amazon has the skill to develop those capabilities and build your dream. That's what he said. And I think that that's a very important lesson to keep in mind.
Thank you very much. There's a comment from Frank, or a question. I think you should take this offline because you already spoke about it, and we are unfortunately running out of time. So it's about business model innovation. I think this needs requires more time than just a few comments by yourself, Marilyn. So then I would like to jump over to Antoinette's questions, who wants to know how you advise leaders to manage distributed teams without being too much of a micromanager. Maybe this is a question for Lisbeth. Would you be able to answer, please?
Yes, actually, this is also a question that came to me from our HODs when we started working remotely, right? How do I make sure that everyone does everything without continuously, you know, going and ask, did you do this, did you do that, you know, because we are no longer in our office. Actually, it's a matter of trust, and also it's a leadership model that we have. I've always discouraged, you know, managers to go and say, hey, did you do this? Did you do that? Of course. But, you know, it's a matter of trust, definitely. So what we were advising was we were having permanent weekly meetings, and if maybe in the office we were having weekly meetings, but that sometimes we were canceling them because we had other things to do. This times the weekly meetings were there, and everyone had to present what they were doing. So so instead of me saying, okay, we are here, here, and here, and here, you know, I would have the team members to present what they have achieved in this specific time frame that was utilized for a certain project. So make the people accountable, trust them, ask them if they need anything, you know, drop a message. Do you need anything? Is everything okay, you know? And for sure, things will develop. And actually, you know, it's a new way of work that has come out also from this time when we were working remotely. And maybe we are enjoying this more, some of us, yeah?
Definitely. So then there's a comment and also a question from Ria, which very much links into what you have just answered. It's about how can the individual performers be motivated instead of the whole company as such. I think you have extensively answered this. So, and then I think let's stop here. This is the last comment by Frank, who says that customers and consumers increasingly judge public listed companies also on the soft values. So the investors start doing so. They look at green transformation, which in certain sector is directly linked to valuations and ratings of companies, which is definitely true, right? Okay, so let's be conscious about the timing. I would very much thank both of you, Lisbeth and Marilyn, for taking your time, for preparing this webinar, for extensively answering the questions of our people and our joiners today. Thanks everyone for your interest. Keep following us on our LinkedIn page. You can also look up and see this conversation again on our YouTube channel. Thanks again very much, and all the best for everyone, and hope to see you again soon. Bye-bye.
Bye, thank you.